Good evening. Welcome. Welcome to the Council District 11 Candidate Forum, hosted jointly by the Brentwood Community Council and the Pacific Palisades Community Council. I'm your moderator, Daniel Abramson. I'd like to start tonight by acknowledging the contributions of the Brentwood Community Council and the Pacific Palisades Community Council. The Brentwood Community Council is the broadest based Brentwood community organization, representing approximately 36,000 stakeholders, including homeowners associations, multifamily residential dwellers, business organizations, schools, religious groups, volunteer service groups, public safety, and environmental organizations. The Pacific Palisades Community Council has been the voice of the Palisades community since its founding in 1973. The PPCC was the model for the current neighborhood council system in Los Angeles, and representation on the PPCC board includes all geographic areas in the Palisades and virtually all categories of organizations in the community. The two councils have taken positions on any issue that affects their communities. They represent their communities on a wide range of these issues, and they represent them to all virtually every level of government, including city, county, state, and federal bodies. And now, on behalf of the BCC and the PPCC, I'd like to welcome the candidates for Los Angeles City Council, District 11. Each candidate was asked to submit a short biography in advance, which I will read, and I will do these in random order. Jim Murez. Jim was born and raised in West Los Angeles, a first-generation American. His parents were Jewish immigrants who came here to escape the Nazi Holocaust. After being diagnosed with a learning disorder, Jim's early education took place in a series of progressive experimental schools where he learned that one solution does not fit all. Jim lives in Venice with his wife, Melanie, and their accomplished children, who both graduated from Venice High School with honors. Mike Newhouse. Mike is a proud Venetian who has lived on the West Side for 25 years. Professionally, he has practiced law for 22 years and owns a small law firm. Mike is also a passionate musician and an active outdoors enthusiast and traveler. Mike has served his community as two-term president of the Venice Neighborhood Council, founder and chair of the West Side Regional Alliance of Councils, and as a board member and volunteer for community organizations, including Venice Arts and the Venice Art Crawl. For the past 5 years, Mike has served as the president of the City of Los Angeles, West Los Angeles Area Planning Commission. Aaron Darling. Aaron was born and raised in Venice and attended public schools from kindergarten through law school. After graduating UC Berkeley School of Law in 2008, Aaron returned to Los Angeles and began working at Eviction Defense Network, representing low-income tenants facing eviction at the height of the foreclosure crisis. Aaron later worked for public counsel, focusing on large class actions, including on behalf of the United Farm Workers and individual general relief recipients. Aaron then worked as a deputy federal public defender in the Central District of California and is now in private practice, focusing on civil rights. Greg Good. Greg has lived on LA's West Side in Council District 11 for 30 years. He moved here after finishing his undergraduate degree at Brown University and began working in education. He taught English in LA's public schools and ran a national education nonprofit. Greg then went to UCLA Law School, after which he returned to public service, working for 7 years at the Los Angeles Alliance for a New Economy, then as the Chief of Legislative and External Affairs at the city, and most recently as the President of the Board of Public Works. Greg and his family live in Delray. Allison Holdorf-Polhill. Allison has lived in the Palisades for nearly 40 years. She was previously the Chief Advisor to the Vice President of LAUSD, where she served the communities throughout the West Side. In that role, Allison has earned the nickname The Fixer because of her dogged ability to respond, listen, and solve problems, including helping school principals clear homeless encampments near campuses. Sonny Lloyd. Sonny is a veteran social studies teacher of 19 years in LAUSD, the last 16 years as a teacher of government, economics, and US history at Venice High School. He is a community leader in the areas of worker rights, housing, race relations, and most recently, medical freedom and public health. Sonny says that he understands that our democracy is broken and our economy is rigged. He has concrete plans to make the fundamental changes we need to end the corruption and set the West Side up for clean, safe streets and broad-based prosperity. Tracy Park. Tracy is a Venice resident who has also lived in Delray and Brentwood. She is a practicing attorney with more than 20 years of experience working with businesses and government agencies across California. She is a partner at a woman and minority-owned law firm that specializes in public entities. She works every day with city leadership, elected officials, and bargaining units on legal and policy matters. As council member, Tracy says she will bring her decades of experience to restoring common sense approaches to issues that affect CD11 CD11 residents. Finally, Matt Smith. Matt is an Army combat veteran and raised in Westchester. He is a small business owner, husband, and father. Aside from his service in the Army, Matt has lived on the West Side all his life. Thank you to the candidates for being here this evening. I know that Council District 11 is a large district, but tonight we plan to focus on the issues of most concern to the communities of Brentwood and the Pacific Palisades. So in that vein, I would like to begin with a straightforward question that you can each answer with a show of hands. How many of you currently live in Brentwood or the Palisades? And how many of you have ever lived in Brentwood or the Palisades? Thank you. And finally, before we begin our in-depth questions, I'd like to ask each of you to tell us in just 1 or 2 words, what do you believe is the single most significant challenge facing Brentwood and the Palisades specifically, not all of CD11? And as with all of the questions this evening, I will address you in random order, so please be prepared. Mike Newhouse, you're up first. A couple of words, most significant challenge or challenges facing Brentwood and the Palisades.
Well, first of all, thank you, Daniel. It's good to be here, and it's good to see all the fellow candidates. I think in Brentwood, one of our biggest areas are buildings and developments in the high fire severity areas of the hillsides, and that really has to be looked at very closely. Brentwood also has some very severe traffic problems, like a lot of parts of CD11 do. In the Palisades, homelessness has become a much larger issue. Obviously, currently, the Palisades Homelessness Task Force, I think, has done a really good job of helping to mitigate a lot of that, but it is a big issue there. There's also hillside fire severity issues in the Santa Monica Mountains and in the Palisades as well. I think for both communities also, what is a shared concern is going to be the application of SB 9 and potentially SB 10 and how that's going to affect, obviously, the character of communities up in Palisades and Brentwood.
Thank you. Aaron Darling?
Yeah, I was going to say, yeah, traffic and fire. With climate change, we're going to see increased wildfires. And so it's really important to limit development in the kind of urban wildlife interface. And especially, I mean, whether it's multi-million-dollar homes or nonprofits, we can't be tempting fate. And so fire and the need for increased firefighters is huge. And then, of course, traffic, especially on Sunset, but really throughout. It's gotten out of hand, and this is why we need smarter infill with more mass transit, but also a way to get fewer people commuting here from long distances, because the more people who live on the west side, who work on the west side, we're going to have less traffic from long distances polluting and filling up the traffic, especially during rush hour.
Thank you. Tracy Park?
I'll be brief. Traffic, the threat of wildfire, homelessness, and SB 9 and 10 development.
We'll talk about all of that tonight. Thank you. Sonny?
Traffic, fire, and skyrocketing rents and mortgages.
Allison?
Fire, I was an evacuee myself. We do not have enough firefighters, although they did a phenomenal job during the Getty fire. Congestion, which also is a problem with fire, and that we don't have safe ways to evacuate certain areas. SB 9 and 10 can and will contribute to that. And I would say, based on the current events, I believe LA will become a sanctuary for women's rights, and we have to be prepared on all fronts, including Brentwood and the Palisades, for our healthcare.
Thank you. Greg?
Yeah, sorry to be a broken record, Daniel, but
okay.
certainly traffic and congestion ongoing. I think where I would distinguish on wildfires, I'd say climate mitigation. And so that is wildfire, that is avoiding overdevelopment, but that's also protection along with safety protection of the wildlife corridors up in the northern part of the district. I think that's going to be really crucial. And then obviously for the entire district, homelessness.
Matt?
Yeah, fire safety and traffic, like everyone mentioned. Also, Brentwood and the Palisades are very unique compared to the rest of the district. If you look at Venice and then you look at the Palisades and Brentwood, there's really different needs in both of those. Looking at what the people in those areas need is it would be very important for me also.
And Jim?
So I will agree with pretty much everything everybody said. Infrastructure, I think, is the wraparound term that I would put into it. I think that addressing traffic is going to be directly tied to SB 9 and SB 10, along with things like sewage and water supply. That part of the town only has such a capacity, and it means changing everything across the entire city to be able to up it by the amount that they're talking about in SB 9 and 10. I think fire is definitely something that has to be addressed. Fire management, fire risk up in the mountains especially. And one thing that no one's touched on is LAPD and the response time, the terrible response time that part of the community has. It's very far remote from the West LA station, and they just don't get the kind of response that I would like to see everybody have, which would be the 740 plan of LAPD, where it's 7 minutes or less for emergency responses. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. As we start our in-depth questions, a few ground rules. First, please stay within the time allotted. There will be a timer on the screen. Please answer the questions asked. Please avoid ad hominem attacks on each other. And I'm also making an additional rule for this particular forum. I think it's easy for candidates to make promises during a campaign. So what I would ask that is, if you suggest solving a problem through additional funding or resources, I would ask that you tell us either the source of new revenue that will pay for it or the offsetting spending cuts to the city budget. And if you forget, I will follow up. With that, let's move to our first substantive question, for which you will each be given 2 minutes to respond. Homelessness is the issue likely at the top of the list of concerns of many residents of Brentwood and the Palisades, primarily because of its ubiquity, but also because it appears to be getting worse, not better. What is your plan to resolve the issue of homelessness, and how specifically is it different than what has been tried unsuccessfully over the past several years? And we'll start with Aaron. 2 minutes.
Thank you. A few things. One, we need to keep people in their homes by strengthening renter protections, including a right to counsel, because we know that people enter homelessness at a faster clip than they exit it. Second, we need to build more affordable housing. And so when we talk about paying for it, the United to House LA ballot initiative would actually pay for this. It's projected to raise up to $800 million in affordable housing and transitional housing and homeless services. So this is a huge bucket of money that has to be used to address the homeless crisis, including using social workers to get people out of encampments and transitioning them to bridge housing, then ultimately to permanent housing with wraparound services. And then we also have to have the mental health component, and that's expanding, which is just a pilot project, but have it citywide with a mental health response team. So when you call 911, it means a trained clinician, like a social worker, psychologist comes out to treat someone in a mental health crisis, as opposed to someone with just an academy training and a gun, because oftentimes LAPD is diverted from very necessary jobs that they have to do by dealing with people who are having mental health breakdowns.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jim, you're up next. Do you want me to, should I repeat the question? I know it was.
No, I think I got it. It had to do with the homelessness. How will I address that?
And how specifically, I think, is your plan different than what's been tried unsuccessfully over the past several years?
So that's an interesting question. You know, back in 2018, I put forward a plan that the Venice Neighborhood Council adopted that said we really need to use open space that was available on the north side of LAX to create a shelter of an open campsite style operation. In 2019, the LA Times published it. And then in about late 2019, the city of San Clemente was tried, and they won in Superior Court that what I had proposed, they were doing, and it worked. The idea is that you create a triage style campsite that if people need tents, of course, you can hand them a tent, but you provide restrooms, you provide showers, you provide electricity, maybe even Wi-Fi, depending. If you think people want to try and get jobs through Wi-Fi. But the basic concept is now been done in Sacramento. It's working. San Francisco's starting to do it. I believe that there are multiple sites throughout West LA where we could separate women, where we could separate families with children. We could even provide daycare services for families that wanted to get jobs at these sites. This is a first step. The second step would be by having staff or caseworkers there that would then help them transition into more permanent housing, whether the housing was tiny homes or shared homes like Heidi Roberts has shown works very well. There are many different programs of housing, and I think that any of those that exist today should only be expanded on, but I don't think we should be doing it where we're spending $1 million a house or subsidizing people that just want to be freeloaders on the beach. Thank you.
Allison, and then I realize it's challenging because you all have to then scramble for the unmute button. So I'll tell you who will be next after as well. So Allison and then Mike will be next.
Thank you. And homelessness is definitely an issue for Brentwood and the Palisades, if I didn't say that in the opening. People experiencing homelessness are suffering, and staying on the streets is not safe. And it's unsafe and unhealthy for neighbors to be surrounded by encampments. We must act quickly. And one thing that distinguishes me from what's happening right now is the urgency in which we will act. We need a plan with dates, deliverables, and deadlines. And this is what I do and what I've known for. So from day one, we're going to treat this crisis like the emergency that it is, and the unhoused are not a monolith. We know that, right? Some are in need of career skills, affordable housing, some are elderly and need room and board facilities, some had an astronomical medical bill, and some are mentally ill, and some are addicted to drugs. And through outreach workers, our unhoused will be given a menu of choices: temporary shelters with an umbrella of services, housing, other options, but staying in an encampment will not be an option. And I'm the only candidate in this race that's actually had direct experience having to clear encampments. And in addition to that, I will focus on preventing homelessness. So the problem is that we're basically drinking out of a fire hose here, because we have 20 more people becoming homeless a day. We get 200 people off the street a day, and 20 more people become homeless. Part of that is we're condemning frail room and board facilities for our elderly population, which is the #1 fastest growing homeless population of all the subcategories. And these are things that we can focus on by using some of the funding that's going to build new units. We can use it to take care of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, and then Sonny will be next.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, I've gotten very granular and specific on this issue. I think, first of all, what we have to do is we have to stop the bleeding while it's happening. People are dying on the streets, 5 to 6 a day. 20 more a day are becoming homeless. What we have to do is we have to give 30-day notices across all encampments throughout CD11. It's the compassionate thing to do, to say at the end of 30 days, we're going to enforce our existing no camping law, 4118, on these sites. What we do on day one when we show up to give that uniform enforcement is we're there with social workers, we're there with community outreach workers, similar to what was done on the Venice Beach Boardwalk last summer, and we are getting people into shelter, into wraparound services. And at the end of that 30 days, we are clearing these sites. The reason why that's going to work is twofold. Number one, people take shelter when there's not the option to sleep on the street anymore. Number two, a lot of the folks that are still coming to Los Angeles in order to take advantage of lax enforcement of our laws or no enforcement of our laws will stop that stretch as well. What that allows us to do is identify our homeless folks and get them on a path to permanent supportive housing. We obviously have a lot of units coming online through HHH. We have Project Room Key, Project Home Key. And on top of it, we have the care courts, which are going to be coming here shortly, which have $14 billion in funding, obviously not only just for the courts and for more housing, but for the psychiatric beds and psychiatric services and psychiatric workers, which are so desperately needed for this population that's trying to get off the streets. But we have to be specific. We have to set dates, deadlines, deliverables, and we can't continue to wait and take the piecemeal approach that's been done in the past, while again, number one, people continue to die and suffer on our streets. And on top of it, communities have to deal with the backside of that, which is having an encampment in your front yard, which is having an encampment in front of your business, which is having effluent going into our ocean, which is having children have to deal with this on the way to school. So I'm very particular about a specific plan. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonny, and then Tracy will be next.
Hi. So, I think the main thing to understand is the root cause of the problem. And that is basically, in a capitalist system, housing is a market failure in some regards. Our system does provide housing for most of the population, but there's a lot of the population that we're seeing that are just not able to afford the rents. And if the private sector cannot house the population, right, then the public sector has to step in. FDR said during the Great Depression, if the private sector cannot employ the population, the government's going to have to step in. And what makes my plan different is a public housing corporation here in LA, where we offer jobs to the homeless to help build the shelters, build the treatment facilities. They can build a resume and actually, sustain themselves after, their job is done. And also being able to pay rent and fund the system, right? So it creates an economy in and of itself. So the money, is it there? Is it not? People talk about this $1 billion fund that's there. And I think a lot of the problems, the nonprofits and the developers that get involved and, they don't really solve the problem. So the government has to take over and do it. We're way behind. We're not going to catch up unless we understand where the market is failing and step in and get it figured out. And I have to mention too, the biggest section of the homeless are African-American. LA is 8% Black, 40% of the homeless are Black. And I do have a reparations program to provide land grants and educational assistance to our Black Angelenos to make up for the racist crimes of our city. And I think that would go a long way in helping the homeless crisis as well.
Thank you. Tracy, then Greg.
Told me to have my finger on the button and I didn't, Daniel, my apologies. So to begin by talking about, what has been tried that has been unsuccessful. I think, to anyone looking around our communities here in CD11 and across the city, we can see what has not worked. Our city has almost singularly focused on long-term new builds of permanent and supportive housing. We know that our HHH funds have been rapidly depleted on those efforts, and yet the production and that supply of units are all over budget and over schedule. I think that it is important that we reshift our focus and put caps on the use of those funds, but refocus on emergency shelter and interim housing solutions. I also think that it is important that we focus on the prevention side of things. We need to protect and preserve our affordable housing stock. We need to cut through the red tape and the bureaucracy when it comes to getting new, good, affordable housing units online. And I also think that it is critical that we provide services to people who are at risk of becoming homeless to help them remain housed. It is far less expensive to help people stay housed than it is to, at some point down the road, get them back into housing and off the streets. I also believe that we need to have customized needs-based housing and shelter solutions available to folks. What hasn't worked is putting people into shelters without regard for economic circumstances, level of acuity, or individualized needs. For example, at the homeless shelter across the street from my house, a total of 58 participants have resulted in only 8 actually getting into housing. We must be more granular.
Thank you. Greg, then Matt.
All right, Daniel, thank you. Thanks for the question. So I would start with 2 key premises. One is that this is a exceedingly complex problem. It will require a sprint and a marathon. This is going to be hard and it's going to require a lot of work, and everybody needs to be in it, and everybody is in it. 2, the notion that encampments are compassionate or humane is false. Every single night that someone puts their head on concrete, they and us all lose a bit of our souls. And so we got to get people off the streets because they're dying, and that's not tenable, and it's not humane. So First, we need to ensure that we're all operating from shared data in real time and actually understand the scope of the problem in a constant and community invested way. That means implementing quarterly volunteer-driven point in time counts. I'm going to have a data response center where we're tracking where encampments are emerging, where RVs are emerging, what our assets are, and that will all be posted on my website in real time so that folks can hold me accountable and folks can all be engaged in the same mission. Two, we need to simply put, have enough places for people to sleep in the district. And that means ensuring that we're creating affordability, that is fast tracking projects that have affordability thresholds, that is Project Home Key, that is shared housing, that is potentially safe camping. It is an all of the above approach to make sure that folks are off the streets, and we need to protect the affordability we have, expand enforcement of our short-term rental home sharing ordinances, protect RSOs, et cetera. We need to get more mental health and addiction services in on the street. That means resetting the relationship with the county and LAPD, and we need to manage our public space. We need to acknowledge the fact that once folks get into housing, there are certain places, particularly around shelters, particularly around schools, and particularly around parks, that are not appropriate for camping, and it's fair to restrict that once we get folks into bed.
Thank you. Matt.
Hi. Yeah, I've been consistent since the beginning. I've said that shelter is a right, housing is earned. Our politicians have been treating this problem as a housing crisis. We're hearing a lot of that. What I would do on day one is I'd assess how many temporary shelters are required, as required by Martin versus City of Boise. We would use FEMA style shelters, and we would have wraparound services. And we have to understand that our mentality has to change. What we're doing, the current administration, and I hear a lot of the same thing, it's what I like to call radical hospitality. We need to change the focus. We need to look at what this problem for what it is, which is primarily an addiction and a mental health crisis. The mental health crisis is fueled greatly by the drug addiction. That's something that seems to get ignored in a lot of this. The more our politicians keep giving and giving and giving, the more people are going to keep taking and taking and taking. People don't want to hear this, but a lot of people have been brought to our communities because of these policies. People have been incentivized to come to our city. It's the best place on earth. And if you can't make it, the best place on earth is going to give you a place. That's the image. That's what's been put out to everybody out there. We have to change our philosophy, and we must stop giving away fish. And we have to treat this for what it really is: addiction, mental health, and we need to provide temporary shelters. And on day one, I'll do that. Also, we need to work with the other 14 council members to enact a citywide camping ban. We do not live in Yosemite. We live in Los Angeles. No one else is talking about a citywide ban. We must do that. We must work with the other council members, and more people are getting on board. And we must also find permanent solutions in more affordable, less dense areas, not the West Side. This is not our problem.
Thank you. I'm going to ask a follow-up question on homelessness. It'll just be a 30-second question, but I think it's important because I think it's fundamental to how we approach solving this problem. And the question is this, Jack, just 30 seconds on the timer. Do you believe, and Greg, you'll be first, do you believe that it should be illegal for a person to live or camp or sleep in a public space if alternative housing has been made available to them?
I think it should be, we should be able to restrict areas from camping. I don't believe that you just lock off the entire city. But I do believe that when people are offered beds, it is appropriate and there are actual meaningful options, that it is appropriate to restrict certain areas from camping.
Matt Smith, you're next, and then Tracy.
Yeah, that's a simple answer. Absolutely. If shelters are available, we need to require people to go into them. The fact that politicians can't simply say that, it's a big part of our problem. That's that compassion sickness. That's that radical hospitality limit where they can go. Again, city of Los Angeles, second biggest city in America. Absolutely, we need to outlaw camping and provide shelters for everybody.
Tracy, and then Aaron.
Yes, I do support a process by which when an individual has been made a limited number of suitable offers of shelter, that they should lose the ability to remain encamped on the street. I am one of the few candidates calling for a clear choice deadline, which would achieve this. That is consistent with the federal court's holding in Martin versus City of Boise, and it has worked in other cities around the state. It's what we need to do.
Aaron, and then Mike.
I mean, it's the hypothetical honestly seems absurd considering the fact that we have 200,000 units that have to be built and that we're not there yet. The Jones settlement is almost a decade old, and that calls for essentially that, but the city hasn't created that housing. So right now, this is a hypothetical that hasn't even come close to fruition. So we do need transitional housing. We do need shelters, and we do need permanent housing, but we're not even close there. But no, ultimately the answer to that is no, because we're not even.
Mike, and then Allison.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. To reiterate, the answer is yes. You absolutely should not be able to sleep outside, especially if shelter is offered. And in fact, the standard you just raised is exactly the standard that the Ninth Circuit laid down in Martin v. Boise. They've made it very clear that if you offer shelter, and if shelter is available, then you should not be able to sleep on the streets. What we have to realize with this as well is that rule is not uncompassionate. That rule is not just looking to property owners. That rule is looking to save people who are dying on the streets. So 100%, we should not be sleeping on the streets.
Allison, then Jim.
So yes, and that's what I said earlier. People will be provided with a menu of options, and encampments are not one of the options. In particular, if they have suitable options, it is the law that we can do so. I'm in this race because I got a call from Venice Beach Bid saying, we've just found, Allison, today, 47 used needles lining the perimeter of our free preschool and an elementary school in Venice. And we had to train the teachers and administrators how to pick up used needles. That's ludicrous. And it's unsafe. It's unsafe for people living in encampments, and it's unsafe for people who are surrounded by encampments. Thank you.
Jim, followed by Sonny.
Yes, I am in complete agreement. I believe that having triage style campsites are the first step. We ought to enforce the law immediately, and 30 days or less, whatever the time period we want to make up is, but it has to happen right away. Allison, I just want to point out, you're not the only one that has to clear encampments. I do it every single week for the last several years at the Venice Farmers Market on Friday morning. It's a regular problem, so don't feel alone. Thank you.
Sonny.
Yeah, the answer to the question is yes. You know, when we do that, when we get there and we need to move very quickly on day one, we would get this public housing corporation going and get the shelters built, get the housing built, and get people the help they need to get off the streets and be proud to live in a home. But at the same time, if we're going to say no to sleeping on the streets, we need to say no to housing speculation. We need to say no to someone having $1 billion and not sharing that with the rest of the population.
Thank you. We're going to move on to another topic, one that is, I think, equally pressing, and that is crime and public safety. So first, as all of you know, District Attorney George Gascon has been criticized by many in the community and is currently subject to a recall. I think it would be helpful for the audience just to table set. By show of hands, do you support the recall of George Gascon? Thank you. Now, a 1-minute question on this topic, and we'll get to your plans in a moment. But I think we would all benefit from understanding, before we get to your plan, your approach to the problem. So my first question is, what do you believe is the primary driver of increased crime in the neighborhoods, in our neighborhoods, especially focused on Brentwood and the Pacific Palisades? And we'll start with Allison, and then Matt will be next.
Thank you. So people do not feel safe, and I will prioritize safety. Currently, and I believe this is the reason why there's an increase in crime, a large percentage of LAPD resources go to the same people with mental health challenges over and over again. And those are people who are in need of mental health. The same is true for LA Fire Department. They receive 1,300 calls a day, and many of them are to address mental illness. We need social workers and outreach workers to deal with mental health issues. We also have 1/4 well, that's 1/4 the amount of police officers that New York City has, which is not okay for a large urban city. So that number needs to change. But we are not using the highest and best use of our officers nor our firefighters right now. And I would also advocate that we use community policing. People with mental health challenges are in need of intervention of social workers and health treatment, not the criminal justice system. And I think that is the key to preventing crime and reducing it. And it doesn't help, by the way, that we have a DA that is not enforcing crime as it should.
Matt, and followed by Tracy. And you will have 2 minutes to talk about your plan. So I do want to try to. So this is 1 minute on just what do you believe is the primary driver of the increased crime in our neighborhoods?
Gosh, there's quite a few things we can talk about, but I'm going to be consistent and I'm going to talk about what I've talked about in many of these debates. The criminals have never been more emboldened, and the law enforcement professionals have never been more on their back foot. This is a great problem that they're dealing with, and it's a big contributor to the crime rate increasing. Our media and a lot of our progressive politicians have painted the criminals as victims over the last few years. Every time there's a police interaction with the suspect and it doesn't go the way people think it should, or maybe it didn't look right initially, it's a gigantic news case. Some of these cases disappear because it was a justified shooting, but the damage has been done. None of my opponents in this race, with the exception of Jim, has been able to say what I just said or agree with it. It's the big thing that everybody wants to just ignore. Police morale has never been lower. And as a combat veteran, I've walked a mile in their shoes, and I'll return morale to the LAPD.
Tracy, followed by Greg. What do you believe is driving the increase in crime?
So I agree with what a lot of what the other candidates have said. I'll simply add to it that drugs and addiction are contributing to the increased crime, both in terms of some of the unpredictable behavior that's associated with it, as well as, you know, the need to constantly fuel the addiction, which leads to increased theft and property crimes. Mental health, also a significant driver of the increased crime problem. And then there are the related issues of inadequate police resources and presence within the community, and the fact that currently there don't appear to be any consequences for criminal behavior, which I agree with Matt, has emboldened this type of behavior, and actually I think significantly contributed to this, the repeat offenses and the lack of aggregation of these offenses.
Greg, and then Mike will be next.
Thanks, Daniel. Yeah, I think the key driver is the proliferation of drugs, specifically crystal methamphetamine and fentanyl. I think that in particular places that has been concentrated, and that coupled with the extraordinary mental health challenges that we have on the street, the legacy of 3 decades of complete evisceration of our mental health care system has created a sort of level of explosivity that has really created some intense hotspots in this district in particular. I think that there has been the loss of resources and focus in particular areas that could address that, namely around narcotics, namely on special divisions that have been impacted by the budgets. And I think that is part of it. And then frankly, also poverty, that coupled with drugs and mental health and people being on the street contributes to it.
Mike, and then Jim, primary drivers of crime.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. And look, as one of only 2 candidates here who has the endorsement of law enforcement, I can tell you that the #1 problem is just a labor shortage. It's very simple. We are a city that should have many more police officers than we do when you compare us either to New York or Chicago. We're having trouble. Matt Smith points out it's a morale issue. We're losing 350 officers a year, even at peak capacity. We can only add 750 through the academies. We're only adding 350 right now. So that's #1. I'm a lawyer. If I got 100 open cases, I'm half the lawyer I am if I have 50 open cases. It's a matter of labor. We need to add officers as fast as quickly. as possible. And we need to add civilian workers to get our 600 officers back onto the street. Number two is we need to increase our sanitation budget. Chief Moore, when he and I met last month, he explained to me that one of the biggest problems he has is that the city is filthy and it has the appearance of a criminal element, and that needs to be cleaned up. Number three, we need our own city public health department. We can't rely on the county anymore. It's those three things that are driving the issue.
Jim, then Sonny.
So I think I agree with everything everyone else has already said. I would say that Prop 47 is the cause of the problem. At least that's where a lot of it started, with the $950, we'll write you a misdemeanor ticket. If you smash and grab less than $900, nothing's going to happen to you. The DA is, of course, a big problem. He's not prosecuting. The poor response time, I think, is a real problem. I think that, everybody has said the same thing. We don't have enough officers. They're not responsive enough. And if we had more officers on the street, people wouldn't be doing the crime that they're doing. And I think that it's very important what Matt said about the lack of appreciation. I think officers need to be appreciated. They need to be respected. And I think that that's so important. It's a personal relationship that, if you have the personal relationship, they're going to take a lot more interest than not. So I'm in agreement with everything everybody else is saying. I think we got to do more for them.
Sonny, and then Aaron.
Yeah, well, fundamentally, we live in a corrupt society, right? Corruption is rampant downtown, and it leads into a society where, it's all about profit and selfishness, and we have this burgeoning inequality. You have inflation that's out of control, and you have a growing, desperate population. And until we, get the corruption under control and start to provide some real leadership in this city, where we're giving people, really livable options and mentoring our youth. I used to work in a juvenile detention for 5 years before I became a teacher. So I saw the same kids coming in from 13 all the way on up to 18. They'd go downtown and they were coming from the same neighborhoods. And, our society just isn't set up in a way. We could solve poverty in this city by taxing the billionaires and really solving the crime problem.
Aaron, primary drivers of crime.
First off, we need to talk about the facts that it's not all crime that's up, but violent crime is, and that's really serious. And there's a lot of things to address there. First of all, we live in a country with more guns than people. So we need gun control. We also have a big problem with ghost guns, with 3D printing, and there's just a proliferation of guns. And so we need to help get guns off the street. I also would say 2 years of social isolation, where people are running around with masks in a time of growing inequality. There's social that creates a very dangerous perfect storm, where people are literally walking around ready. But this has to be considered in the context of growing inequality. But at the end of the day, that doesn't really solve the question of what we need to do about it. So we need to address the fentanyl and the drug crisis for sure. We need to address the problem of violent crimes, particularly freeing up officers so that they could address these things. Too many times officers are diverted with mental health calls, and they need to be on the streets to fight crime.
Thank you. Well, now this next set of questions, these will be a 2-minute question. And it is quite simply, what would you do that is within your power as a city council member to reduce crime specifically in Brentwood and the Pacific Palisades? What makes this question challenging, I think, and what I would ask all of you to remember is that governing is about choices and limited resources. And so I know that presumably all of you support more police and more resources for the police. But as you give your answer, please tell us where those resources would come from. Are you advocating an increase in taxes? Are you advocating cuts to other parts of the city budget? Are you advocating cuts to other parts of the LAPD budget? What specifically would you do to increase resources for whether it's policing or any other part of the city budget that would reduce crime in Brentwood and in the Pacific Palisades? So 2 minutes, and we'll start with Sonny, and then we'll go to Mike next.
Okay. I think first of all, we need to look at, the most violent cities in the US, Chicago, Washington, DC, they're some of the most policed cities that we have. And so we need to start thinking more creatively about how we govern our society, and that means getting into more leadership models, right, with the young people, mentoring our youth, bringing city council into our classrooms, right, getting kids engaged in the civic process at a young age. I live in an apartment building. We had a shooting a few weeks ago in the alleyway. And the police came, yes, they took a report, but I see the same kids running around, and they have no leadership, right? So job fairs, career training, and I'll repeat it again, redistribute, taxing the billionaires in this city, getting rid of poverty, right? We're thinking right now within the system. We're not thinking about fundamental change. Yes, we could continue to add on more police, and response to the urban decay, to the inequality. And then what are we? We end up in a police state, right? We're RoboCop, which that's what that movie was made to show what would happen in America in 50 years on this trajectory. So I'm for investing in the people, right? Two of my slogans: tax the billionaires, invest in the people. We could wipe out poverty in this city and set people on a path where they have good, solid choices in life. A lot of our candidates are running on fear. Let's just hire more police and hide away in our homes. I'm running off of love of the people. I believe in the people, and you invest in them and they will perform.
Mike, and then Matt.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, first and foremost, what we have to do is instill a culture out of the council's office that supports what police officers do and emphasizes the fact that police officers are members of our community. Right now, we don't have that happening right now. There's almost a cultural war on police. And I think that starts from the top, especially in CD11. That's number one, what I would do. My brother's a police officer. And again, obviously endorsed by law enforcement. I feel strongly about this. Number two is what we have to do is get more senior lead officers onto the street, because those are the folks that are really dealing one-on-one with neighborhood watches, with businesses, with people in the community. And we don't have enough senior lead officers right now. How we could immediately make an impact, because it's going to take time to get more officers hired. I would like to see 11,000 officers. It would take probably 4 years to get that at the current rate that we're hiring people right now. But what we can do is hire 600 civilian workers to get those desks at LAPD filled, so that 600 officers can get back onto the street. That alone would allow us to increase our SLO budget. Obviously probably tenfold in terms of people that are working in those communities. Number two, where are we going to find the funds? Well, first of all, what I would do, and I've been very clear about this, I would use my discretionary funds within my council office to first and foremost immediately finance LAPD overtime. And also to finance LA San or Department of Sanitation overtime while we are finding those additional funds and while we are making more hires. We can do that immediately. Council offices have budgets. Number two, in the latest proposed budget, we have $1.5 million in special purpose funds that have been proposed. Those are very fungible and for a reason. So we have a lot of funding there that we can put towards this problem also. But we just need to make sure that we have the labor to do policing in our community. And we just don't have the labor right now. We're not talking about over policing. We're not talking about going to 12,000 like Chicago or 36,000 like New York. We're just talking about having enough labor for the situation. And I would really make sure that happens.
Matt, and then Aaron will be next.
Well, first off, I really appreciate all the talk about morale. That's been something I've been pushing, and we absolutely have to get that back. I do want to give a little bit of pushback, though, on the idea that we don't have the funding, or we'd have to take money from somewhere else to fund the police. First and foremost, I've said it before, I'll say it again. We pay 5-star taxes in this city, and we are getting 1-star service. There's a lot of waste happening right now. The number one priority, and many studies will support this, the number one thing people are looking for is safety. Police and fire department are the number one priority of the government. So whatever needs to be done, I believe there's plenty of funding for it, but we absolutely need to fund our police department. I don't believe we need to raise our taxes. Again, we pay the highest taxes in the country, but we have to return morale to our law enforcement professionals. We have to look at, I mean, Mike mentioned it, senior lead officers. There's things we can do. There's a lot of different options, but we have to get the 740 standard observed. We have to get police out there quickly. People have to feel safe. And again, I'm going to push back on, if we want to put more funding into the police, if we want to refund the police, like I've mentioned, I don't believe we need to look very hard to find the wasteful spending. There's a lot of waste in our government right now. We just have to figure out where that is. And as a fiscal conservative, as the only conservative in this race, that's a big part of why I'm running. I'm looking to eliminate the government waste and fund the appropriate things. We don't need 7 different shelters for the homeless. We don't need a dog park on every block. What we do need is we need police first and foremost, and we need our citizens to feel safe. And that'll be my top priority.
Aaron, followed by Greg.
Yes. Well, first off, we need to get more officers out from beyond desks and in patrols. We need to increase the number of people on patrol. If they're behind desks, they're not as much service to the community. But there's so many other things that we need to look to actually what has worked in the past. It's 30 years after the LA riots. What happened after that? There was a massive investment in parks and youth services, in essential services. And guess what? Crime went down. But that was through resources to the community, because we know that the most resourced communities are the safest communities. That's not a dig at police. That's just a fact. There's a reason why Brentwood has less crime than, say, Watts. Crime oftentimes is a function of poverty and the lack of resources. So we need to talk about that. But that's not sufficient for the folks listening here, who everyone deserves the right to feel safe in their communities. Everyone deserves the right to feel safe in their homes. So we need to, first off, have a mental health response team so that when people are in mental health crisis, we're not sending, say, 4 officers to surround that person, waiting for them to do something till they get arrested. I see that all the time in Venice, and it doesn't work. And it's a terrible diversion of police resources. So we need a mental health response team, so trained clinicians come out to free up officers. Like I said earlier, we also need more officers on the streets patrolling as opposed to behind desks. Then we also need to focus on violent crime and robberies. And so right now, the percentage of crimes that are solved is terribly low. We have to improve that. And so that means focusing then on what we're really worried about, which is home invasions, robberies, murders, violent crime. And right now, that's unfortunately not what the crimes that LAPD is solving, or is quite frankly being diverted away from. So yeah, I think it's a measure of focus, but also about creating more resources for a lot of communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Greg, then Allison.
Thanks, Dan. What we need to do is we need to address the actual problem, not with a blunt instrument, but very strategically and tactically. So as a starting point, I would convene a task force with Chief Moore, Chief Crowley, with the Bureau of Sanitation, with Rec and Parks, to identify the key hotspots where we're seeing the proliferation of open air drug markets, particularly those that were combined with mental health challenges, and where we're seeing the sort of explosivity of violent crime that we are seeing in pockets of not just Brentwood and Palisades, but other parts, including Venice and Westchester and the other parts of the city. But it's happening in Palisades and Brentwood. Identify what those places are. I would then, and I've said this in the very first forum, all of us got on from the outset, I will put discretionary funds from the council office into LAPD overtime for Pacific Division and for West LA Division to go specifically and focus on narcotics diversion, and getting in front, not rousting the unsheltered, but actually stopping the commerce, to stop the fuel from going laying onto the mental health fire. All of that presupposes that we reset the relationship with PD. We have to be in partnership. We have to be collaborative. Policing's got to always improve, just like everything. But you don't do that in combat. You do that in collaboration. And so bringing everybody together. I've worked with both divisions, and I've worked with Chief Moore a lot, and I look forward to that opportunity. We need to address mental health and reset the relationship with the county to get more resources into mental health, to get more resources into addiction services. I'll start a program with the county to identify the top 30 most acute sufferers of mental health. We will surge resources to them with continuity and with consistency to get them into the beds they need, so that we can take some of the most extreme situations that we're seeing emerge in different parts of the city and address them critically.
Thank you, Allison, and then Tracy and Jim.
Thank you. So I will definitely prioritize safety. I have a specific plan on allisonforla.com, but within these 2 minutes, I will highlight part of that plan. So we need to expand community policing. We had beloved Rusty Redican here in the Palisades. I think everybody in the Palisades knows who he is and what he did for our community, and that's the type of thing that we need. We need to expand community-led engagement. There's a Circle pilot program right now in Venice. LAPD basically receives about 140,000 homeless calls. That's roughly 1 call per minute. And we need to make sure that we can send folks out there, like I was talking about, mental health experts and social workers to deal with those calls. That will also free up LAFD. No one talks about our firefighters, but they are more than half of the 1,300 calls they receive every day are going to address mental health, and that is not okay. I would definitely use discretionary funds for our police officers and for our firefighters. Koretz is doing this currently in CD5, and our current council member is not doing this here. When we close encampments, this is part of my plan as well, that will equal less crime. And we must address the meth and fentanyl crisis, because those drug markets have recidivism, and that's where we see violent crimes. And we're also increasing the amount of mental health patient beds we need, because that meth rapidly declines the brain. So we have to address that immediately, because just like we're increasing homelessness, we're increasing mental illness by not addressing that problem. We can civilianize office jobs. Ron Galperin did an excellent study on this in 2016 that would put more officers on the street, and it would be more cost effective. And that study has been sitting there. Finally, we can upgrade technology, because right now it takes 4 hours to process an arrest, and that's ridiculous. On the issue of recruitment and attraction, if we start addressing affordable housing, first-year officers would be more likely to work in the city. Thank you.
Thank you, Tracy.
So as a lot of you know, when we defunded LAPD by $150 million in 2020, we lost about 800 police officers, and we saw drastically reduced resources for some of the most essential policing functions provided by LAPD. For example, we lost our sexual assault and human trafficking task force. We had reduced resources for robbery, homicide, gang prevention, community policing. We have about 12 narcotic enforcement units citywide. I've said this before, but quite frankly, with the unfettered supply of methamphetamine and fentanyl on the streets, particularly here in Venice, I could use all 12 of those units over here until we get ahead of that particular problem. We have inadequate resources for our mental evaluation unit, which is a program that partners with clinicians from Department of Mental Health. We also eliminated, because of defunding in 2020, our homeless outreach and proactive engagement team. These are all essential things that LAPD does. And I think as we are assessing our officers, our funding resources, and how to best meet the needs of the community to address the issues that we're facing, we need to focus our prioritization on those essential functions that actually get us the results in the community that we need. Patrol is another great example of this. The increased presence in our communities is something that I have heard district-wide from our communities, both in terms of deterrence and responsiveness. I also would like to see a permanent beach detail in the Palisades, as well as an increase to our park rangers. I am thrilled to be endorsed by our frontline officers of the LAPD, our park rangers, our sheriff's deputies, and the California Coalition of Law Enforcement Agencies.
Thank you, Jim.
So I just want to say that I've heard about this thing they call the war on drugs for the last 30 years, and we're losing the battle. I mean, it's not getting any better. So yeah, if there's anything that that as a council person I could do to help it along and solve the problem, I'd be happy to do that. But I'm not sure that we have the resources that the federal government and the state doesn't already invest in it. I think I would ask the police officers, what can I do to help support you? I think that that's a very important issue. And if we look at the statistics that are out there today, I think the idea that has been floating around for some time now is that LA Fire Department and LAPD are spending about 50% of their man hours on issues dealing with homelessness. If we can get that organized, we can save a tremendous amount of money. And I believe that your original question had to do with where were we going to find the resources to improve crime reduction. And I believe that that's one of the simplest, easiest ways that we can do it. Just get organized by getting the people off the streets, out of the encampments, into an organized condition, an organized situation where we can help people get into housing, where we can get people off the street. We can reduce a tremendous amount of costs that we're spending right now, that the officers could be out actually doing preventative crime and reducing the amount of time that it takes to respond. And I think that's absolutely number one on the list for me. We got to get organized. And I think Greg's right. We do need a very, very robust data collection and evaluation, statistical analysis to be able to find and pinpoint the hot points. And that's something that I know a lot about. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. We are just at about the halfway point of our forum tonight. So we are going to move to a set of topics that are related, all of which I think are of significant concern to our community and that I would broadly refer to as density issues. And that encompasses a number of challenges, including zoning and local control, housing affordability, homeowner rights, traffic, wildfires, and the environment. And we'll spend a bit of time on this. But I'd like to start with what many perceive to be the core of the challenge, which is the tension between zoning restrictions and homeowner rights. So in 1 minute for each of you, my question is, do you believe that owners of single-family lots in Brentwood and in the Palisades should be permitted to subdivide their lots, convert homes into duplexes, and add ADUs? Should this be allowed for all areas of Brentwood and the Palisades, or only certain portions? Tracy, you're going to be up first, and then Aaron will be next. It'll be 1 minute, Jack.
Sorry, thanks for that. So I do believe that there are certain areas where subdivision of lots and adding of density, including ADUs, may make a lot of sense. I also fully appreciate the concerns that many in other parts of our communities have about that densification, the impacts on the environment, our infrastructure, parking. I personally do not like Sacramento dictating to local communities what types of building and planning and zoning is appropriate for them. And I would strongly urge the LA City Attorney's Office to oppose SB 9 and 10. I also support the proposed ballot amendment to make it clear in the California Constitution that those are local decisions. The characters of our communities throughout CD 11, and particularly in Brentwood and the Palisades, are very unique and distinctive. And I think that local communities should make these decisions.
Thank you. Aaron, followed by Matt.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, it's a bit of an incomplete question because SB 9 and 10 has not really, the ball's not completely in local government's control. So, you know, it's not up to, say, a city's single council person, let alone a city at this point. We do have an affordable housing crisis, so there is going to be density. But my concern is that there's going to be ADUs, duplexes, triplexes that we're adding density without infrastructure. So there's going to be more traffic, terrible noise creation and construction, and then we're not even building affordable units. And so, you know, we see this problem in Venice a lot. So yeah, I think there's a lot of neighborhoods that we need to support single family homes. And then when we're doing infill, it's along major commercial corridors that are closer to, bus lines, metro lines, so that we have an infrastructure and we're not just creating giant traffic jams. So I'm really a proponent of, transit-oriented development.
Matt, and then Sonny.
Yeah, I do have to strongly disagree with what Aaron said. I am running because I want to represent my community. I've heard, as a resident of District 11, Sacramento, groups like HUD, all these people telling us what we need to do with our land, people from the outside. So I'm not sure what we can do to stop it, but I'm going to do everything we can to stop it. I don't believe Brentwood or the Palisades should have to build denser than what they want in their communities. Look, I'm from Westchester, and they've started duplexing everything in Westchester. There are probably 25 or 30 hidden duplexes throughout Westchester that people just built and no one stopped them. I think that our local governments should advocate for their communities and shouldn't just simply bend the knee when they think that the people that are higher up have made the decisions. I'm here to fight for District 11, and that's Brentwood, the Palisades, and every other community here.
Sonny, followed by Allison.
Yeah, we live in, it's urban living, right? And you're gonna have denser living situations in a city. This isn't, small town Wisconsin or middle of California. It's inevitable. There's a lot of people living here. And I think, we could be more creative in how we trade with other parts of the state, because, we have this urbanization thing going on. And I think our populations could be spread out more across the state and the country. So, but for right now, yes, I think, we're talking about solving homelessness and crazy inflation of housing costs. You're going to have some more density. And yes, the local communities can have control over how that's done, but it's inevitable. And, historically, I'll have to stop there, but.
Thank you, Allison, then Jim.
Sure. I don't think it's responsible to increase density in our hillsides and fire-prone communities. Mount St. Mary's is a great example with the Getty fire. Upper Mandeville, folks can't even get fire insurance right now. So this is a problem. And I already talked about how we have a lack of the number of firefighters. We have a lack of evacuation plans, and we need to resolve that. The other thing I want to say is SB 9 does not solve the affordable housing problem at all. In fact, it's not a requirement. So it is not going to solve that. The Turner Center for Housing and Innovation out of UC Berkeley just found that it will only lead to slow and a small increase in housing supplies. What my plan is, and this is on my website at AllisonForLA.com, is that we build along those major corridors like the Livable Communities Initiative is suggesting. And that way we decrease our carbon footprint and we decrease congestion, which is critical in particular for the Palisades and Brentwood area, where right now, if you're going down Sunset, you simply cannot make it along. Thank you.
We'll come back to that, Allison. Jim, and then Greg and Mike.
So I have lived in this community for my entire life, over 60 years. The history of the community and the character of the community, I think, is a great jeopardy if we start subdividing parcels. I think that that's much different, perhaps, than having an ADU unit over a garage or a granny flat or a guest house. I think guest houses have existed in the Palisades and Brentwood for decades, probably since the beginning of time. I think that it's important that we maintain the larger lots, that where we have green space, where we have outdoor natural environments. I think that, it does create a sense of a difference between other part of the community like Venice, where everything is much smaller and much more dense. I think we need to look at the community plan. I think we need to make sure that the city's in alignment with that kind of thinking. But again, I would leave it up to the community at the end of the day. And I think that we really have to consider traffic when we start talking about density.
Greg?
Thanks, Dan. I think that local control is actually crucial. I think SB 9 and 10 are blunt instruments that simply sort of take away not just preference, but reason. Again, building subdivisions and more density up in the hillside areas is questionable from from a fire safety perspective. And so, I think SB 9 and 10 was targeted to some other types of cities that aren't engaged in addressing housing affordability with the robustness that the city is. And it truly is a blunt instrument. I think ADUs are, as Jim alluded to, that ADUs are distinguishable, and I think that they can be really meaningful for particularly for seniors, for lots of different folks and family members, where we have more and more folks living at home. And then I think it is absolutely crucial to look at the infrastructure impacts whenever you're looking at increasing that density. So,
thank you, Mike.
Yeah, I think it's a crucial distinction between ADUs and SB 9. I'll take them in turn. I think ADUs are attractive to most homeowners in the sense that you can add value to your property. You can add office space, especially in a post-COVID world. You can house an aging parent or a child who's come back from school before they make their way in the world. I think that's one area. SB 9 and SB 10 are just wrong-headed because they're not going to accomplish what we need to accomplish. We do need more density. We do need more housing, and we don't want to build it in otherwise open spaces. But the solution is clear and commonsensical, and it's been successful in a lot of other jurisdictions, and it's starting to be successful in a lot of parts of Los Angeles, which is adaptively reusing commercial buildings that we have. Some are office buildings that can be repurposed or can be split use. Some are old hotels that have been vacated but are several stories tall. Some are just other commercial buildings that can be repurposed, and we can get a lot of additional density out of that.
We're not done with this topic. We have more. But I'd like to do a quick show of hands style question, but then you will have an opportunity to talk more about this and to explain your answer. As you know, Brentwood and the Pacific Palisades home values continue to increase, which is generally applauded by current homeowners, but it is discouraging to renters and to others looking to move to our neighborhood. So by show of hands, do you believe that reducing the cost, or at least slowing the cost of increases of existing homes, is an appropriate policy goal of government? One, okay. So I'd like to ask each of you now to take a minute to expand on your answer. So to what extent then do you view existing home costs to be a component of affordable housing policy? And is affordable housing a problem to be solved only through subsidized units or rent control, or does it require broader land use and zoning changes? And if you were a city council member, how would you address this? Jim, you'll be first, followed by Greg.
So if I got the question correct, I think that the solution would be to some people are referring to it as walkable communities. I've lived in a mixed use project where it's ground floor commercial and 2 stories of residential above it for the last 35 years with my family. I think that's the kind of space that we can start to address more affordable units. I think we can create workforce housing. But I think that it's very important that as we create housing on the West Side, that we really focus on what is the job market, what is the demand for the housing? Are we providing housing that is in the wrong economic scale? And I think that that's something that we really have to think about. If people are making 6-digit salaries working in downtown Santa Monica or along Wilshire Corridor, do they really need to have an apartment that costs $2,000 a month, or can they afford one that costs $4,000? I think that 1/3 rent concept is important, and same thing with the housing prices, of course. Thank you.
Greg, and then Tracy.
Thanks, Dan. I think we absolutely have an affordability crisis, and it is crucial that we increase our affordability, and that's across the city. It is hard, it is difficult, but I think it is a dangerous premise to suggest that it would be an acceptable long-term plan to have to just concede to super affordable places and super non-affordable places, particularly given the sustainability and climate implications of that, because the reality is people are coming in and out of this area, and so we need to expand affordability. And I think that there are opportunities there, certainly as a starting point, where there are good, smart projects. We require and demand affordability covenants, and we figure out how to up that number as much as possible. And then I think we can also explore broader land use policies. For example, reducing the fees on affordable units in projects. We can look at things like that and get creative.
Thank you, Tracy, and then Mike. And the question is, I know because it was a lengthy question, so I'll repeat it a bit. What sort of, in summary, what is the appropriate balance between addressing affordable housing through subsidized units or rent control or other specific targeted measures as opposed to broader land use or zoning changes?
Thank you for that question. So, I mean, obviously the affordability crisis in our city is real. Just to rent the average 2-bedroom unit in the city of Los Angeles, you would need to make well over $100,000 a year if you were only spending 30% of your income on housing. And we know that the vast majority of Angelenos are spending far more than that. Frankly, I can't afford to buy a house in my community where I live in Venice. And so I think home ownership remains an important goal, but we are going to have to build units. And I am fully committed to escorting good affordable housing units with the opportunity and pathway to ownership to the front of the line. The sort of sad truth in all of this is that perhaps the first home you buy, it doesn't get to be in the Pacific Palisades. You have to start small, build that wealth and equity, and then move up. Thanks.
Thank you. And then we'll go to Mike next, and then Aaron.
Yeah, look, it's obviously one of my favorite topics as a 20-year land use attorney and as former president of the Planning Commission for this area of the world. Look, at the end of the day, we need to build more units, which is what will drive down the price. That's the market indicator that's going to make that happen. The question is, where do you do it? The solution is not eviscerating single family neighborhoods. It makes no sense. SB 9, SB 10 were unnecessary and only came about as a bad political compromise to an otherwise good goal of increasing density and increasing affordable housing. Again, what we need to do is adaptively reuse as many buildings as feasibly possible. And number two, we need to really embrace the Livable Communities Initiative, which Allison and I talk about every chance we get here, and what Jim actually has lived in for the last 35 years, as he says, which is mixed use on the bottom, housing on top. We can build a lot of small micro units without parking minimums and open affordable housing and even affordable ownership to our next generation of people.
Thank you. Aaron, followed by Allison.
Yeah, so I think it's a both and. Consider the fact that rent in Houston is half of that in LA. We definitely need more units, but we also need more affordable units. The state of California has already told LA that we have to zone for over 200,000 affordable units because the city hasn't met its affordable housing obligation, but that's not going to do it. So we do need to make it easier to create, more units. But I think the key question is where, right? We cannot develop on the urban wildlife interface in the Santa Monica Mountains. We should be developing though along transit corridors, especially where metro is being expanded and where bus only lanes are likely to happen. The fact is that land use is also related to traffic and is also related to climate change. We need to create an infrastructure to make it easier for people to get out of their cars. We also need to make it easier for people who work on the west side, who commute long distances, to be able to afford. So that means workforce housing and more affordable housing while we are creating more market rate housing as well.
Thank you, Allison, and then Sonny.
Great. This is a great question. We do have a workforce crisis right now in the city of LA, in particular in CD11. I know that firsthand, overseeing 150 schools. We couldn't hire people to work in our after school programs to extend the day. And we're still desperate for people because gas costs a lot of money now. And, the minimum wage, who can afford to work here? So I think as we build much needed new housing, we need to rethink how the city can work with our community builders. And I've talked to 20 affordable housing experts, and they all agree that we need to do it in a more sustainable way that boosts access to public transit. Younger people don't want to be car dependent. That also leads to poverty. So the Livable Community Initiatives is an excellent plan for that. My skill set is engaging communities and bringing people together. And there's a lot of low hanging fruit here that we can do with the city. We need to eliminate some of the zoning, but we also need to eliminate the massive amount of red tape that is happening right now with affordable housing units. It takes sometimes 6 years to get permits. And that is something that I know we can solve. Thank you.
Thank you, Sonny, and then Matt.
Yeah. So, we're moving in the wrong direction here, right? We build for the elite in this city. We build huge boxes. We build luxury condos for $5,000 a month in my neighborhood. So yes, definitely the government has to get involved. And I've talked about the idea of reparations. I think we can do that on a city level and provide land grants to Black families hurt by the city's racist past, such as Evanston, Illinois has the nation's only reparations program as a municipality. As far as land use goes, we need to look at the inflationary effects of these projects. If your condos are going to go for $4,000 a month, and that's going to raise the prices on everybody in the community, then that's a no-go. Cost of living is 2 or 3% a year. We shouldn't be going above that with our housing policies. As far as rent control, yes, it's great. It needs to remain.
Thank you, Matt.
Well, I'm going to challenge all of my opponents to name the coastal community with weather that we have that's done what they're suggesting. I'm hearing Illinois, I'm hearing Texas. Look, my father bought 2 homes in Westchester as a plumber when it was affordable. When I graduated from Loyola High School in 1991, I couldn't make it in LA. It's why I joined the military. When I got out of the Army in 1996, I still couldn't afford to live on the West Side. I'm hearing a lot of people talk about things that I don't think make a lot of sense. Look, we absolutely need to look for affordable housing for the people that work in our communities. I know that's a challenge. We have to figure out how to do it. And the idea that the government's going to be able to solve this by telling people to build, look, we're supposed to have a certain amount of units in new developments set aside for affordable housing. Guess what? It doesn't happen. At the corner of Ocean Park and Lincoln, there's a development. They're buying their way out of their requirement. I'll stop that and do whatever I can, but we have to be realistic with what we're doing and what we're planning.
Thank you. I'd like to turn to another component of density, and that's fire safety. And this will be a 90-second question. The Pacific Palisades and large parts of Brentwood are part of the Los Angeles Very High Fire Hazard Severity Zone, which means that fires in these neighborhoods are relatively more likely, they're very fast moving, and they are potentially deadly. Do you believe that the city's existing plans for fire prevention, emergency evacuation, and emergency preparedness in the Palisades and in Brentwood are sufficient? What changes would you advocate for upon taking office? And how would you fund any improvements? We'll start with Sonny, followed by Greg.
Well, I've been here in LA for a while, and I've lived through a lot of the fire seasons. I think the question is limited, right? Because we share the land, we share ownership with the state and the federal government. And from where I sit, the federal government really has not put a lot of money into fire prevention. They're too busy starting fires around the world, I think. So that again would be lobbying the feds and the states to fund, the protection of our lands, and also, providing more tribal sovereignty over these lands. We have indigenous people who have been the caretakers of these lands for thousands of years. They were able to control the fires and the environment, and they must be laughing at us for not being able to figure this out, but we need to bring them into the conversation, if not give them control over parts of the lands that really they stewarded for the last thousands of years. And we have to watch how we're building in these areas, right? The lanes are too small. Even if we have a good plan, the developers have not put in the public infrastructure. They're all just concerned about short-term profit and not the safety of these communities. And so that's been a big problem with fire trucks not being able to access these developments. And so, really controlling our building in those areas. And again, I'll circle back to the federal resources are badly needed.
Thank you. So Greg and then Matt, and the question is, do you believe the city's existing plans for fire prevention, emergency evacuation, and emergency preparedness in the Palisades and Brentwood are sufficient? And what changes would you advocate for? Greg?
Thanks, Dan. This is obviously a really crucial question. I don't think the question is when. I think the question isn't if. It's the question is when we're going to be dealing with more fires. Climate change is real. The world is on fire, and we got to pick up the buckets. I think The emergency plans are inherently insufficient given the increasing scope of danger that we're looking at. And I think we can presuppose that. I think there's a lot of things that can be done. We need to make sure that LAFD is fully staffed, particularly the engine companies up in Brentwood and Palisades, always staffed, and also fully and adequately resourced. Meaning in terms of equipment, meaning in terms of partnership with county and other jurisdictions. In the case of major wildfires, that all those protocols and all those emergency operations are ready to rock and roll and tested and ready to go into motion. I think it is crucial to make sure that where development is happening, if it is happening, that simply put, there's no fudging on ingress, egress, and evacuation plans. It's absolutely crucial that we hold them, everybody, accountable and tightly. And then we also need to make sure that there's going to be adequate water supply. Working with DWP to make sure that there's going to be adequate water in the case of emergency fires, and that we think ahead and intentionally on that particular kind of drought that we're in.
Matt, and then Mike will be next.
No, I don't think we're prepared. I mentioned before that safety is the number one concern, and I think that gets lost a lot of times. I think what people need to do is they need to remember the thoughts that are in their mind when these fires are coming to these homes. It's always such a horrifying event, and it's so easy to forget. We need to absolutely have our evacuation routes ready. We need to have developments that make sense for our community. But let's also be honest here. Look, I don't have a degree in fire prevention, fire safety. I don't think anybody on this panel does. I think we need to listen to what the fire chief says, listen to what the professionals say, and do whatever it takes to get our citizens safe. Again, LAPD, LAFD, safety is number one. We spend a lot of money. It's that 5-star services, or excuse me, 5-star taxes. We spend so much on taxes, and we need to make sure the money is put into the proper spots. And the people up in the Palisades and Brentwood, they are our front line. To think that they don't have everything that they possibly need to keep them safe, I think that says a lot about what our politicians' priorities are in this modern time. We need to look at all the developments, Mount St. Mary's, we need to look at what's going on there. Just think of what would happen if a fire happened at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. How's anybody going to get out of there? We have to really take this very seriously. Safety is number one.
Thank you, Mike, and then Aaron.
Yeah, well, look, first and foremost, when it comes to fire, we have a similar problem we do to the police department, public safety. We simply don't have enough labor for what is called for in certain situations. So we obviously have to make sure that the fire department is fully staffed, that they fully have all the resources they need to be successful. I think the latest budget helps with that, but we have to look at that even further. But at the end of the day, the only way that we're going to truly make these hillside areas of Palisades, Brentwood, and any areas in the Santa Monica Conservancy Mountains or recreation area is to be very careful about what, if anything, we build there. It's one thing to remodel something. It's one thing to build where something was already built. It's another thing to build new construction on roads which are already too small and don't have enough ingress and egress for them anyway. What I think we can do to have a win-win situation on this and to naturally help the situation is I already am a big fan of and would work very closely with Ted Lieu's office to make sure that HR 1487, which he brought forth to extend the National Recreation Area through the Santa Monica Mountains, expand it there, bring it through the coast down into the Santa Monica Bay into Bayona. That's one of the easiest ways we can not only help preserve that land, but we can bring in federal resources to help fight disasters when they pop up. To have the National Park Service there in a recreation area and with their firefighting capability to augment what is there with the LA Fire Department would really help in these specific areas, and we should do that.
Thanks, Mike. Aaron, and then Allison.
Yeah, I mean, first, the obvious thing is LA Fire Department has to be adequately staffed, and also that firefighters have to be sited in areas that are prone to high fires, especially in fire season. But we also need to think about the context of this. With climate change, there will be increased wildfires. Like it's not a question of if, it's when. And so we have to be prepared, and we can't tempt fate. So that means the conservancy of the Santa Monica Mountains is crucial. We have to limit development. That doesn't just mean, more multi-million-dollar homes being constructed, but also, not taking out trees. Even if it's a nonprofit, we can't have large developments in wildlife areas that are prone to high wildfire. But it's also about adequate fire roads, adequate evacuation routes, water access. So there's a lot of tricky things, but ultimately we also need to address climate change. That's why I'm really pushing for the for LADWP to be pushed to 100% renewable energy by 2035, in addition to the obvious need for the conservancy of the Santa Monica Mountains. And then, look, the Palisades and Brentwood are on the front lines of this. And so we need to, protect the lives there. But to do that, at the end of the day, this is an infrastructure problem, and we can't tempt fate with building more.
Thank you. Allison, and then Jim, and then Tracy.
Thank you. The city's existing plans are not sufficient. And despite that, our firefighters are amazing and we need to throw them a lifeline. On day one, I will introduce a motion to increase the number of firefighters that we have, because we have the same number of firefighters since the 70s. It's outrageous. And it is true that wildfires are increasing and we need to address the climate changes, which I have a plan for that on my website. I believe I'm the only candidate in this race on my website that has a plan for addressing emergency preparedness and fires. I will also assign a field deputy for emergent preparedness that will preferably be a retired firefighter. And that will be my version of 911 regarding fire and life safety issues. Logistics is antiquated for the fire department right now. They need new trucks. They need new tech. I was at Command Central during the Getty fire because I was overseeing 150 schools, including Revere and Pali, where the principals called me at 2 a.m. And I looked at the mapping system and it's antiquated. So they need that technology. Firefighters, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of their calls are going to address the homelessness crisis rather than fire preparedness. So we need to address that. And during the Getty fire, I found out firsthand that we didn't have a good school protocol. I changed that. I also found out that we couldn't figure out what the particulate emissions were in our schools. And I was responsible for making sure that we have 200 air quality monitoring systems throughout the city of LA. So now you can address that in real time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
So I would like to start off and say that the U.S. Forestry Service believes that there's actually a need to do controlled fires. And I'm not opposed to that if they can control it. I think that's probably a great way to go. I know that Malibu has been dealing with this problem for decades. They hire goats, and they're people that actually ranch goats. And I think that goats do a lot for clearing off the mountainside. So I'm kind of interested in finding out more about how we could expand that technology. But on a more serious note, I think that deep learning, that's artificial intelligence, I believe that they now have the ability to be able to spot fires. And the earlier we could spot smoke and fires starting, the much quicker we could respond to it and the much sooner we would be able to get it under control. So I think I would invest money in helping the fire department start off with a pilot program to get that kind of equipment spread throughout the mountains. And the other thing that I want to say is that Mountain Gate Golf Course and the Getty are both developments up in the mountains. And I don't believe that anybody would say that those two projects increased the hazard of fire. I think that they tremendously reduced it. And I think if you ask the fire department, by having those kinds of projects that exist that have large scale water supplies, and they've invested hundreds of millions of dollars into preventing fire from burning their operations down, that's actually a good thing, and it's a reduction in fire. So yeah, if we can put water tanks on the top of the hill, I would support it.
Thank you, Tracy.
All right, thank you for this question. I know this is really important to the Brentwood and the Palisades communities, and I've had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with local residents in your communities talking about these issues and talking about the need for a wildfire protection plan. There are some pieces of state legislation that I think are really important that I would like to see get through as well. SB 55, which prohibits new housing construction in our wildfire prone areas, as well as SB 12, which creates fire safety standards prior to permitting and development in our high fire risk zones. Over the last 30 years or so, we have seen wildfires in California get larger and more destructive, and we absolutely cannot have another Paradise situations on our hand here on the west side of Los Angeles. As part of the Community Wildfire Protection Plan, and there are some cities that have done these and done them well, Laverne, Santa Rosa, Rolling Hills, and Malibu are just a few of these. I think it's essential to convene the decision makers and the subject matter experts to provide their input on things like, infrastructure, our fuel hazards, water, our emergency evacuation routes, building standards, and things like that. I think it's important that we have planning and building and safety, Bureau of Engineering, and other departments. Shoots, that's not enough time for this question, Dan.
All right, Tracy. We are going to have to shift to another topic. And it's, again, related to density, and that's traffic. And this will be a 2-minute question. Residents of Los Angeles, interestingly, have broadly supported funding for public transportation, but usage has generally lagged. What would you do? What is your plan as a council member to reduce traffic in Brentwood and the Palisades specifically? Would you focus primarily on public transportation or on roads? And Councilmember Bonin has spoken frequently about the Sunset Standard, as he called it. What would you do to reduce traffic on Sunset and Wilshire, particularly the eastbound afternoon traffic, which all of us know tends to be the worst? Aaron, you're first, followed by Matt.
Yeah, first off, the reason why the eastbound traffic is so bad at rush hour is because so many people work on the west side and can't afford to live here. So we need to reduce the number of people commuting long distances. So affordability is key. So workforce housing, inclusionary zoning, decreasing the number of people who travel long distances. Second of all, we need to create an infrastructure to get people out of their cars. So that's going to be hopefully a rail, but definitely shuttle along Sepulveda Pass. And as well as right now, the problem is not only that Metro doesn't go far enough, but once it's extended, we need first mile and last mile so that people can easier connect to these lines, so that intro-west side traffic is, intro-west side public transit allows people to get to then the corridors to get them to downtown or wherever they're going, or back to the west side. But yes, Sunset is huge, and a larger infrastructure won't just address that. So yeah, the Sunset plan does make sense in terms of like coordinating with schools and other public institutions during rush hour. We can't just have a bunch of families just lining up to pick out individual kids. If we can have buses and shuttles and carpools along Sunset. I also think when we think about development, it doesn't make sense to have a lot of infill development along Sunset. So we certainly don't want, more housing density, more people, popping out of residential areas off of Sunset. And then I also think when I mention intro west side traffic, it's so bad, not just from even south of San Vicente, but then up to Sunset. So then, I think we also need to then think about when I'm talking about intro west side traffic is like, what does it look like to have the shuttles, like the micro minis, that then get people to the public transit, so that everyone's racing to the 405.
Thank you, Matt, and then Mike will be next. And the question is, what is your plan to reduce traffic in Brentwood and the Palisades specifically?
Yeah, I'm a small business owner. I've been driving in LA since 1989. My business is getting things from A to B quickly. With all due respect to Aaron, you mentioned one of the problems with the traffic. You actually missed the main reason there's so much traffic heading east. The reason there's so much traffic heading east is there's only 2 roads going east, Wilshire and Sunset, and it creates a natural bottleneck. No one can go north of Sunset and go east, and there's nowhere to get east between those 2 streets. It causes a natural bottleneck. It's always been a problem. It's going to get worse unless we figure out ways to fix it. There's a lot of things we can do. Everyone keeps talking about taking people out of cars. I'll tell you this, we have a lot of money that gets dedicated towards traffic congestion alleviation. On day one, I'm going to sit down with those people and look at every option that we have, whether it's congestion pricing, whether it's one-way roads, whether it's flex roads, whether it's no left turns. Look, It is the worst situation coming out of the Palisades and Brentwood trying to get east. Like I said, I've driven probably 1,000,000 miles in my life, and people ask me, what's the worst part of traffic in LA? I always tell them, don't try to go east on Sunset or Wilshire. You're never going to get anywhere. So we need to have politicians that get what's going on. They're not trying to tell us what to do and put everyone in buses. Look, those are all good solutions. Those could all help. I don't think there's a lot of people living in the Brentwood and the Palisades that are ready to jump on a bus. We need to look at realistic solutions, and we need to look at every solution or every option that we have to get this done. And I'm the type of person that's going to look at everything, and I'll leave no stone unturned. But we have to look at what's really happening, and there's no way to get out of there. So we'll have to figure something out.
Thank you. Mike, and then Allison.
Yeah, thanks. Look, first and foremost, we're never going to solve this problem until we get people out of cars. And the only way we're going to actually get people out of cars is to have housing available where people work. The easiest way to do that without excessive government intervention, with using the market systems that we have in place, is to adaptively reuse buildings and to build on top of one-story commercial and mixed-use commercial units. That's how we're going to actually build small, micro, affordable housing for most people that are working in communities. And right now are contributing to those 600,000 trips over the Sepulveda corridor during the day. Those trips are what's causing the problem on the Sunset, going both ways because people have to come too far to get to work. So that's number one, what we have to do. Number two, what we have to do is we got to finish getting, the red line all the way down into the purple line to UCLA. And quite frankly, we also need to connect the purple line to the blue line on the west side, which will allow people to actually use our subway, to actually finish our subway as intended, in addition to finishing the green line to LAX, but that's a slightly different geographical issue, but we need to finish that. Number three, it's not that we necessarily need to add more bus routes, but bus routes need to become more efficient and actually on a schedule that works for people. A big part of what we can do in order to make that happen is to increase funding by increasing ridership. The problem right now is nobody wants to ride public transportation because it's filthy and it's dangerous, or at least the perception is that way. We could do a lot to making people use public transportation more commonly if not only were those public transportation options clean, but if they were safe. And I think what we need to do, at least in the short term, is look at putting a combination of armed officers and unarmed officers on public transportation to give people a feeling of safety until we can get ridership back up.
Thank you, Allison, and then Greg.
So the Sunset Corridor is congested, and I've spent a lot of time in my life in that congestion living here in the Palisades. I can tell you, I recall vividly one of my kids had soccer practice when they were little at the Barrington Park, and it would take an hour to get there, an hour for the soccer practice, an hour to get back. And I had two other little kids, so it was just a mess. And it really has, I've lived here since 1996. It really has gotten increasingly worse. And part of that gridlock is similar to the gridlock that we have in City Council. We added capacity to the 405. That didn't solve the problem. There's plenty of studies since Marvin Browdy's days to address the issue. And again, that did not solve the problem. I think right now, some low-hanging fruit is we need to make sure that all the schools along Sunset are abiding by their conditional use permits. And we also need to make sure that they're carpooling in the way that they've committed to, because that is not the case with some of these schools. We do need to make sure that we're not increasing density. That's critical. I think the purple line will help. I think this proposal with the 405 going, putting the subway tunneling through, going to Westwood, that will help significantly. I do think we need to have housing available where people work with the livable communities initiative type thing. We need to make sure that people feel safe on buses, and they don't, and we need to encourage that. I do think it's more in vogue right now because people recognize that we do have a problem spewing more fossil fuels, and people do want to decrease their carbon footprint. So this would be a way to do that. I will push to streamline the permit process to make sure that we can build more sustainable and more smarter community buildings and build the affordable housing that we need. But all of that said, there are a lot of ideas, And I do think we need to figure out a solution, because people literally don't want to even buy houses, because at certain parts in the day, you can't leave your house if you live north of Sunset. Thank you.
Greg and then Tracy.
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, echo Allison. Sunset can just be a colossal nightmare, right? And so I think this, like, some of the other, frankly, existential crises that we are dealing with, namely homelessness and climate change, it is a extraordinarily complex enterprise. And what it requires is an all of the above sort of approach. As a starting point, you got to make sure that we keep our hands on the proverbial wheel, meaning that I will push very hard, if I'm council member, to maintain the CD11 seat on the Metro board. That's a matter of projects, that's a matter of resources, that's a matter of being in the room when these decisions end up getting made. That's going to be crucial for the district, and it's going to be crucial for Palisades and Brentwood. We got to get people out of their cars, and so that means expanding options. I'd like to expand LA Now to the northern part of the district. I would like to explore dedicated bus lanes, more dedicated bus lanes, though not on Sunset, to be clear. We need better coordination. I agree with Allison, and I've talked about this quite a bit. We need to get all the heads of those schools together, not just once, but on a regular basis, to make sure that we're holding everybody accountable. And I don't say that with any derision towards the schools. It's just that we need to make sure that everybody's on their P's and Q's on what they're required under their CUPs. We need to get on the macro. We need to essentially increase walkability, and we need to increase housing. It does matter. And in the long term, the fewer people that are having to get in cars, the less traffic we're going to be looking at. And then for the long term also, we need to, of course, make sure that our metro projects are delivered on time. These are going to be crucial. They will, and that is also in terms of connecting them for subsequent projects.
Thank you, Tracy, then Sonny and Jim.
Thank you so much for that. This is a really interesting question. Sunset Boulevard, was built 100 years ago to serve a population that was much, much smaller than we have here in Los Angeles. And this has historically been a real tricky question. There are no real feasible options to widen it. I certainly do agree that enforcing the CUPs with the enrollment caps and the staggered drop-off times are really critical components of trying to mitigate the traffic there. But I also do think that strategic investments in traffic light optimization, as well as the deployment of traffic control officers to help prevent gridlock in some of the congested areas that we see, like around Barrington and Sunset, and Bundy and Sunset. And I also hear a lot of candidates talking about, getting people out of their cars and onto public transportation. And yet it was interesting. We were in another candidate forum not too long ago where the question was asked, how many of you actually use public transportation? And I think with the exception of Greg, who met his wife on a bus, everybody said, yeah, once I took it to a USC game. And I really question the billions of dollars that are being spent in some of these systems when our local elected officials don't even bother to make the investment in keeping the ridership safe. Our ridership is down 70%. And I do think that over time, these are important investments. But if we're going to be making them, we need to make the same concomitant investment in keeping them safe for the families and the people who actually do ride them and depend on them. So there's a lot to think about. There is no easy solution to abating the traffic on Sunset Boulevard, but I welcome the opportunity to work with your communities to decide on the solutions that work for you.
Thank you. Sonny?
Yeah, so, we have a crisis, and we got to think out of the box to solve it. And this fantasy that the private market is going to provide the affordable housing, the workforce housing that we need, it's not gonna work, right? And a public housing corporation gotten off the ground through funding the billionaires that live in this city, which there's a lot of, 160 billion total in wealth, could wipe out poverty in the United States completely with just the billionaires in this city. So that's number one. Number two, people don't ride the transportation because it doesn't really work for them. It takes too long to get places. It's not very clean. And so you need to do things to incentivize people. That means making the buses free. And again, funding that through taxing the billionaires. And I say the billionaires, I'm not talking about raising taxes on everybody. And I believe the taxpayers already fund the buses. Also syncing the traffic signals with the trains and buses, right? And actually having dedicated bus lanes so that the bus and the train is not stuck in the same traffic as the cars. Bike lanes, we could improve more bike lanes in the city. Biking is a great way to get to work. I bike to work myself, and I've always lived very close to my job. And improving the sidewalks, the walkability, very important. There's a lot of places in this city where there are no sidewalks. And yeah, I think I've said it all. I have 20 seconds left. I would just say again, fundamental change. We're in this mess because our economic and political system, and unless we start to rework the foundations, we're going to remain in this mess.
Thank you. Jim.
So I'm going to look at the problem again upside down, I guess, but I'm going to start off and I'm going to say that we have to very carefully think about how can we incentivize people to get out of their cars. And I think that I've been saying from day one that we have to have express bus lanes. And Sepulveda is a street that's controlled by the city, not by Caltrans. So that would be a very easy place to quickly put an express bus lane. See, I'm not going to be around as long as the rest of you because I'm a little older. So I want to do something today that will affect us today and improve things today. I remember Sunset Boulevard back to 1950s. And I don't think most of you have been alive that long, but Sunset Boulevard is a residential street. It's mostly houses, and we're treating it as though it's a commercial corridor. Wilshire Boulevard, on the other hand, is a commercial corridor. And we have to stop the northbound cut through traffic that people coming out of Santa Monica, coming out of the business district are getting onto Santa Monica Boulevard, are getting onto Sunset, and creating greater traffic density on Sunset. That's number one. If we want to solve the problem on Sunset, we've got to stop people from coming to Sunset from other cut throughs. And that, of course, is also affecting the cut through neighborhood problems that everybody sees. I really think that we need to create an app that allows people to subscribe to private bus services, and high density occupancy vehicles, 10 people or more, should be able to share that exact same express bus lane. Other cities do it. There's no reason that we only have to have Metro public buses running back and forth. We could very easily do a rideshare program like an Uber, but where 10 or 15 people could all subscribe that happen to work in Santa Monica and need to get to Encino. And that's a really simple thing. And I'm sure there's plenty of startups out there that would love to build it for us. That would be a cheap, easy solution we could do today.
Thank you. We are short on time. I'm going to try to squeeze in one final question. We'll do 30 seconds on it for each of you. And it's because we haven't had a question specifically on the environment. This is a broad topic. It's everything from open space and neighborhood parks to global warming and global climate change. So in 30 seconds, please just tell us your top priority in the area of the environment. We'll start with Allison and then Sonny.
So I'm an environmental lawyer by trade. I took on the nuclear industry and prevailed as a first-year attorney. The top priority would be to get the city to meet its 2035 100% clean energy goal. We can do this. We did it at LA Unified. We have already made tremendous progress piloting the solar program. It has to be done. And then I will focus on the water. We need to make sure that we can capture water during storms. We're doing a pretty good job on it, and we can do significantly better. Thank you. I'm honored to have the endorsement of the Coalition for Clean Air. Thank you.
Thank you. Sonny, then Mike.
Yes, backing up, the 100% renewable energy by 2035 is very important. But for that to be a success, we need to mobilize the population to actually get behind that. I could walk down the street and I talked to 100 people and maybe one of them will know about that plan, right? And so the key to success is getting into our schools, getting into our communities, educating people on how to get behind this plan, right? Our government wants to vaccinate everybody. They got everyone behind that plan, but not this sustainable plan is not out there. No one knows about it.
Thank you, Mike, followed by Aaron.
Thanks for the question. My entire educational background is in environmental science and environmental law, and I also am a practicing environmental attorney. What we have to do, number one, is I would want to reject the quote unquote restoration plan for the Biono wetlands. I think it'll be a waste of 9 years, disruption to the ecosystem, and a waste of at least $250 million. Number two is I want to work closely with Ted Lieu, as I said before, to make HR 1487's study results a reality and to extend the national recreation area from the Santa Monica Mountains down through the coast into the Santa Monica Bay and Biono. I think that would be a wonderful legacy to leave the district.
Thank you, Aaron, and then Matt. It looks like we lost our timer, but I'll have to keep an eye on my watch. Aaron?
Yes, I've been endorsed by well-known environmental advocate, State Senator Ben Allen, because I'm about preserving open spaces, but also transitioning to 100% renewable energy. I am so happy to hear the other candidates talking about what I've been talking about from day one, which is we have to push DWP to get to 100% renewable energy by 2035. That's the most aggressive modeling, and that means we need a city council to push DWP to do this.
Thank you. Matt, and then Jim.
Yeah, I grew up riding my bike to Dockweiler Beach. A number of years ago, I expanded my business to include rainwater sampling. It's a requirement by businesses that connect to storm drains because whatever goes into the storm drains ends up in our ocean, just like Bologna Creek. So that will be my main focus, cleaning our streets, making sure that everything that ends up in our ocean is actually water and it's not pollution. I think that's pretty much the limit on what the District 11 council member can do, but everything in terms of the environment, we absolutely have to be good stewards of our environment.
Thank you, Jim, and then Greg and Tracy.
So I would fund community groups that want to do green work in the community, people that want to plant trees, people that want to do things like maintain San Vicente Boulevard. I think we need more parks, especially if we're going to be doing higher density housing anywhere. We got to start creating more little pocket parks throughout the city. And I just want to say that for the last 20 years, I've been off the grid. I have a 17.5 kilowatt solar system on my roof, and I heat my entire building with solar water. So I'm happy to tell people how it's possible to do it. And I would definitely lead that into the community. Thank you.
Thank you, Greg.
Thanks, Dan. So I want to make sure Hyperion is ready to be a full wastewater recycling facility. I want to make sure that we're capturing food waste so that it's not creating more methane in the air. We need to expand EV infrastructure. I want to expand the wildlife corridor over that's east of the 405 over to west of the 405 up into the northern part of the district. And we need to expand incentives for energy efficiency. I'm endorsed by the Sierra Club. I'm endorsed by the LA League of Conservation Voters, and I'm proud to say so.
Thank you, Tracy.
There is absolutely no way to talk about all the environmental initiatives I want to bring to this district in 30 seconds. So you can check them out at tracypark.com. But one thing I did want to mention, because it's super cool, on April 3rd at 3:39 p.m., the California grid was at 97% renewable energy sources. We don't have to wait until 2035 to make this a reality. We are almost there, and I am fully confident with the right investments, we are going to see that even sooner in LA. Thanks.
Thank you, Tracy. That concludes our question and answer portion of tonight's forum. I want to thank the candidates for their engagement, their thoughtfulness. We will close the evening with 1-minute remarks from each candidate, during which they will tell all of us why they believe they are the best person to serve as the next city council member from District 11. Mike Newhouse will be first, followed by Allison. Mike.
Thanks, Dan, and thanks to the Palisades Community Council and Brentwood Community Council for a fantastic forum. Look, we've obviously got a lot of serious challenges in CD11 right now. And what I think we need in our next council person is somebody who understands both sides of the fence. What I mean by that is somebody who has intense city hall knowledge, under the 20 years that I've spent as president of the Venice Neighborhood Council, and then as the founder and chair of the West Side Regional Alliance of Councils, of which Palisades Community Council and Brentwood Community Council are, of course, members. And then as the president of the Planning Commission. I did that for free and for fun as a civic duty, while at the same time owning a small business that employs 8 other people and serves my clients on the west side of Los Angeles. We need real common sense, practical solutions to our problems. If we keep doing what we've done in the past, we're not going to have different results. But if we elect leadership that isn't battle tested and doesn't have that pre-existing knowledge of City Hall, there's going to be a big learning curve there. Thanks.
Thank you, Mike. Allison, and then Matt.
Thank you, PPCC and BCC. It's been a pleasure, and you've done a great job moderating, by the way. I'm the only candidate in this race with a proven track record navigating a large bureaucracy and getting divisions to work together to solve problems during a crisis. I've done big. I worked for LA Unified as the board vice president's chief advisor. We had a $20 billion budget. The city of LA has an $11 billion budget. And during the emergency that it was, we were able to feed people 160 million meals. And this is what I will bring to the homelessness crisis. It's going to require someone with my experience, because this is a systems failure. We need someone that's capable of navigating a large bureaucracy, and herding cats is what I actually like to do. And I do think it's unbelievable that here we are in 2022 talking about turning the clocks back on reproductive freedom in our country. And I do believe that this will become a city's issue, because California will become a safe haven, because we are going to allow people to be in charge of their bodies. Thank you.
Thank you, Allison. Matt, followed by Sunny.
All right, thank you guys. First off, you can find more about me on my website, which is mattsmithcitycouncil.com, or you can check me out at letsfixla.com. I entered this race because I didn't feel like our politicians were representing our community. I'm the only one in this race who did not vote, endorse, or work with Mike Bonin in the past. In fact, I'm the furthest candidate from his progressive policies in this race, and there's not even a close second. I'm running to return common sense values back to our community and represent all of the people. I'm not taking 6-figure donations from special interest groups. I'm self-funding most of this campaign on my own, because I believe what I'm saying, and I stand behind what I'm saying. I have a treatment first plan for the unsheltered. I want to return safety back to our communities. And as the one person in this race who's walked a mile in law enforcement shoes, I can do that. And that's why I'm running. So thank you everyone for having me. I appreciate being here tonight.
Thank you, Matt. Sunny, and then Greg.
So you can find out more about my candidacy on lloydforlacitycouncil.com. And when you read that platform, you're going to see things that you just don't see on the other candidates' websites. Someone just talked about bodily autonomy. You know, I'm the only candidate openly standing up against the human rights violations that are vaccine mandates. And I think that's very important. That's a constitutional crisis. You need someone with the bravery to stand up to big pharma. I'm the only candidate who's running on a reparations ticket, fixing the crimes of our city's past. You're not going to heal Los Angeles until you heal Black Los Angeles. You're not going to heal America until you heal Black America. And lastly, I'm the only candidate who's a working class renter in the neighborhood, someone who's I represent the demographic that's being pushed out of Venice. I see the holes in the system. I see that there's fundamental change that is needed. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunny. Greg, followed by Tracy.
Thanks, Dan. Look, we are facing multiple existential crises. They require the sprint and the marathon, and you need somebody in this district who's run those marathons and who's actually made transformative change from the outside, whether it's teaching 35 5-year-olds how to read, or building broad coalitions to transition all of the waste hauling trucks in this city from diesel spewing jalopies to clean fuel vehicles, or standing up departments like the Civil and Human Rights Department, which I did, or negotiating the eviction defense program with the city and the county. What we need is someone who convenes, not combats. Flamethrowing and ideological islands achieve nothing. We need somebody who has a demonstrable record of bringing folks together from the outside and the inside towards tangible results. That's why the LA Democratic Party, that's why the LA County Young Democrats, that's why the LA League of Conservation Voters, the Sierra Club, and the LA County Federation of Labor have endorsed me, because they want somebody, and we need somebody who knows how to get things done.
Thank you, Greg. We'll go to Tracy and then Jim, and then it looks like Aaron, I don't see you on the screen. So if you are still on, please speak up, but we'll go to Tracy, then Jim.
I just want to thank the BCC and the PPCC for having us here this evening. I really appreciate the opportunity. You know, I jumped into this race 11 months ago at a time when it was something that people said, you know, you're not going to beat an incumbent, you're a first-time candidate. But I knew that what our communities here in CD11 was a change. And I have now done over 100 community meetings across our district, and I have designed my platform and my policies to be responsive to the needs of our neighborhoods, our residents, our stakeholders, and the businesses across our city. We all know that we have the existential crisis of homelessness that must be addressed, and public safety, economic recovery as we emerge from the pandemic. Our beautiful coastal district is threatened by climate change, and our infrastructure around our district and the rest of the city is crumbling. I welcome the opportunity to bring new leadership and to be your voice at City Hall. Thanks.
Thank you, Tracy. Jim.
I want to rethink where we're going and where we're coming from. And I just want to start off and point out, I believe that the oceanfront walk clearing that was done along the beach was a total waste of money and a disaster. And I think trying to do it again in the future will show just as much of the same. If you take the $5 million that was spent and you divide that by the 200 people, it comes out to $25,000 a person. If you multiply that times the 3,500 homeless people that are in West LA, it comes out to $87 million. We don't have $87 million to clean out CD11. That said, I just want to point out that I'm the guy that finds solutions before most people realize there's a question to be asked. And I have 3 patents already under my name with over 100 sightings of people that have followed my lead, with 2 museum showings, one in the Smithsonian, one in the Computer History Museum. I think innovatively. I'm not part of the box. I'm outside the box. Murez for City Council. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you. And thank you to all of the candidates. Thank you to the Brentwood Community Council and the Pacific Palisades Community Council for sponsoring tonight's forum. I hope everyone found it engaging and informative. And on behalf of the BCC and the PPCC, thank you for attending and have a good night. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for having me. See everyone tomorrow.
Thanks a lot, everybody. See you tomorrow.
If they don't cancel it.